Hello, my name is Mackenzie Neely. I am a senior graduating at the University of Washington, Tacoma, and I am graduating with my bachelor's in social welfare. Today, I want to be talking about the topic childhood adversity and the impacts of trauma. So, with that, adverse childhood experiences are a huge public health threat to our nation. Childhood adversity actually impacts the development of our brain structure, our hormonal systems, and the way that our DNA translates. In fact, children who experience childhood trauma are 4.5 times as likely to develop depression and 12 times as likely to commit suicide. Using the biological, psychological, and sociological model from a social welfare lens, we can address overall health outcomes and expectations as a result of these experiences in adolescence. The biopsychosocial model of wellness in medicine examines how these three aspects occupy roles in relative health or diseases. The PPS model also stresses the interconnectedness of all of these factors. Adolescents who experience trauma are vulnerable and oppressed. The NASW actually states that social workers pursue social change, particularly with and on behalf of vulnerable and oppressed individuals and groups of people. Social workers' social change efforts are focused primarily on issues of poverty, discrimination, and other forms of injustice. These activities seek to promote sensitivity and knowledge about oppression and cultural and ethnic diversity. Social workers strive to ensure access to needed information, services, and resources, equal opportunity, and meaningful participation in decision-making for all people. I truly believe that the students of today are the change makers of our future, and as a social worker, I feel called to really focus on the code of ethics, and I feel that it's my duty to not only be a part of the intervention services, but also be a part of prevention and educational opportunities such as this presentation today. According to the CDC, adverse childhood experiences are potentially traumatic events that occur in children that are the ages 0 to 17 years old. Some examples of this are experiencing violence, abuse, neglect, witnessing violence in the home or in the community, having a family member attempt or die by suicide. It also includes aspects of the child's environment that can undermine their sensitivity, their sense of stability, bonding, such as growing up in a household that has substance abuse problems, mental health problems, and instability due to parental separation or household members that are in jail or prison. So, looking at some risk factors for individuals and family risks, families that are experiencing caregiving challenges related to children with special needs, for example, children who have disabilities, mental health disabilities, or physical illnesses, children and youth who don't feel close to their parents or caregivers and feel like they can't talk to them about their feelings, youth who start dating or engaging in sexual activity early and don't feel that they can confide in their parents or guardians about these situations, children and youth with few or no friends who engage in aggressive or delinquent behavior. In a school setting, I think this also calls to isolation and bullying. Another factor is families with caregivers have a limited understanding of children's needs and children development. And families with caregivers who were abused or neglected as a child themselves also struggle to have those tools with their own children and families. Families with low income, families with adults with low levels of education, families experiencing high levels of parenting stress or economic stress, families who have caregivers who use spanking and other forms of corporal punishment, families with inconsistent discipline or low levels of parenting, families that are isolated, families with high conflict, negative communication styles, families with attitudes accepting or of justifying active aggressive behaviors. So now that we have addressed some of the biggest risk factors, let's also look at some of the bigger individual and family protective factors. So families where children feel safe, valued, supported, taken care of, are all families that create nurturing and consistent environments. Children who have positive friendships, relationships, networks, children who do well in school, which can mean a lot of different things, children who have caring adults around them, and families who serve as mentors and role models for them. This also includes families where caregivers can meet basic needs of food, shelter, and health services for children. I do want to note, though, that food, shelter, and health services are the core basics, and there's a lot more that goes into protective factors alongside those things. So families who have caregivers who have higher college degrees, families where caregivers have steady employment, families with strong social support networks and positive relationships with the people around them. This could include neighbors, this could include family friends, and more. Also, families where caregivers engage in parental monitoring, supervision, and consistent enforcement of rules. Families where caregivers work through conflict peacefully. Families where caregivers help children work through their problems, because problems are going to occur, right? So healthy mechanisms, healthy coping mechanisms during those times of trouble. Families that engage in fun and positive activities together. Families that encourage the importance of school for their children. So those are some of the family factors. So why am I talking about these risk factors, protective factors, family matters, the community, and the whole environment in itself? Why am I talking about all of that? Well, some of these positive and negative experiences in childhood can really either put children at risk or they can put children in a place to thrive. So when looking at the negative experiences in childhood and teenage years, with these issues, there's chronic health problems, mental illness, and substance abuse that can follow into adulthood. And these negative experiences that are known as adverse childhood experiences are also called ACEs. The CDC talks about ACEs as potentially traumatic events such as neglect, experience or witnessing violence, having a family member attempt or die by suicide. Fortunately, we can prevent ACEs, and we can educate parents, communities, and policymakers about how to help children grow up in a safe and stable environment. Unfortunately, this kind of knowledge has not been talked about in schools, in medical settings, or in our communities, in our own houses nearly enough, which is why I'm presenting on this today. Working at an elementary school has shown me what it means to provide equitable care for people of color. The organization that I entered for, Communities in Schools, has actually designed social emotional learning practices for students to identify their own emotions, learn how to regulate their emotions, and just learn to understand the entirety of their environment. Social emotional learning refers to a wide range of skills. These skills include the attitudes and behaviors that can affect a student and affect their health, affect school, and affect life. So consider the skills not necessarily measured by tests or critical thinking, but more so emotional management, conflict resolution, decision-making, and teamwork, which are all such vital skills. In school, we don't just go to learn the subjects, math, science, English, all of those things. We also learn how to become a trustworthy adult. We learn how to work in teams. We learn how to take around the environment around us. So state standards are what SEL looks like in each state. So each state has comprehensive free-standing standards for SEL, which are a developmental benchmark in preschool. However, only 8 states have standards for SEL development for early elementary students, and 8 more expand their standards to kindergarten through 12th graders. So these statistics are extremely underwhelming, which just emphasizes the lack of resources and opportunities that oppressed minority groups face throughout the educational system. For social emotional learning programs to be trauma-informed, they must take into account that many learners are experiencing strong and overwhelming emotions that may be connected to traumatic events that are going on at home or outside of the school environment that they're now bringing to the classroom. Those who are in helping roles, such as teachers, social workers, and other medical professionals, must learn their own triggers and identify ways to not internalize a form of secondary trauma. For my education at the University of Washington, Tacoma, I had a wise professor who spoke on internalization, and Dr. Rich, I will remember this for the rest of my career. Dr. Furman stated that internalizing secondary trauma is a quick ticket to burnout, and it could really lead to leaving the profession altogether. So learning new ways to stay grounded and keep centered are not only self-care tools, but essential ways to keep longevity in social work. So returning to center for me includes meditating in between clients, but this may look different for you. Nonetheless, keeping our mental and our physical health strong is a necessity and not a choice if you want to be an effective medical professional. Students who are unable to learn new information when they're continuously operating in a state of fear because the brain, when affected by trauma, is significantly limited in its capacity to receive and integrate new information. So on this note, when looking at the capabilities of a student, we must look way beyond the surface. So further, educators must recognize that in the school setting itself, there might be high stress, not only for children, but for adults too. So working in such settings with educators who face vicarious traumatization through their ongoing interactions with oversight agencies, community members, stressed out colleagues, and other students that are affected by trauma. So from a trauma-informed perspective, the emotional stability of the adults in the school really takes on importance here. So many students that are affected by trauma will have had caregivers who are unavailable to provide this consistency, and so having that from an adult is super important. Of these studies, particularly high rates of ACEs have been found among individual people who self-identified as Black or American Indian and Native American compared to those who self-identified as non-Hispanic whites. One recent study found that individual people who self-identified as Black, Hispanic, or multiracial individuals have higher rates of ACE scores than those who self-identified as non-Hispanic whites. Jane Levy states that trauma fractures comprehension as a pebble shatters the windshield. The wound of the sight impact spreads across the field of vision, obscuring reality and challenging belief. I thought that was really powerful. So the reality is that trauma is all around us. And it's time for us to start talking about unpacking trauma. It's uncomfortable. It's overwhelming. It brings to light events that have often impacted our own families and friends. And sometimes it's easier to not talk about and to not face, right? But it's time that we start making trauma a required health screening at visits. It's time that we start implementing tangible tools and resources for parents and guardians and their families and communities and education systems. It's extremely vital that we uncover the history and patterns that have led to this current state of being, because the current state of being is not functional. Research has displayed negative outcomes for children who experience unresolved trauma into adulthood and a measurable decline in health for traumatized populations. It's time to take action to this threat to society. Thank you so much for listening. I appreciate it.